A whisper from the ruins. Mom told me not to move. What the officer and his canine found shattered them. A police officer and his loyal canine were wading through a drowned street in the heart of a forgotten town. The rain fell like grief, relentless and cold. Then came a tug on the leash, and a bark, sharp, urgent. Moments later they opened the door of an abandoned house, and inside they found a little boy, soaked, silent, and hiding where no child should ever be alone. What he whispered next would unravel a secret buried beneath the floodwaters, and it would break hearts across the country. What happened after will leave you in tears, and maybe restore your faith in second chances. Before we begin, tell me this. Have you ever seen a dog do something that humans couldn't? Drop your story in the comments. I'd love to hear it. And if you believe no child and no animal should ever be left behind, hit that subscribe button. Because the story you're about to hear might just change the way you see heroes. Silver Pines, Missouri, wasn't a town that made the news. Tucked between rolling plains and the crumbling banks of the Clearwater River, it was known for its quietness. Church bells on Sundays, lemonade on porches, and neighbors who remembered your birthday even if you didn't. But tonight, none of that mattered. Tonight, Silver Pines was drowning. The rain had fallen for 48 hours straight, a relentless gray curtain that turned streets into rivers and backyards into lakes. Street signs were swallowed whole. Power lines fizzed in the distance. The air smelled of rust and soaked pine, and the sky bled no light. Only cloud, only thunder, only the groan of nature swallowing the small. Through this drenched chaos walked Officer Ethan Moore, 34 years old, with a lean, weathered frame built less by muscle and more by grief and resolve. His dark brown hair clung to his forehead, plastered wet under the edge of his rescue helmet. His eyes, hazel but often mistaken for green in certain light, carried the hollowness of a man who had once held more than he lost. Ethan walked with the controlled calm of someone who had seen too much and still kept going. He was not the kind of man who talked to strangers on grocery lines or shared coffee break stories, but he was the one who always showed up, especially when it mattered most. 2 years ago, his life had shifted off its axis. A car accident, one careless turn, a shattered windshield, and then silence. His son, Jamie, had been 6. Ethan never forgave the world for taking him. He didn't cry loudly or curse the heavens. He simply folded the boy's last drawing, tucked it into his wallet, and requested a transfer. That was when he met Shadow. Shadow was a 4-year-old German Shepherd, bred for strength and trained for search and rescue since 8 weeks old. His coat was thick, black and tan like burnt copper in the right light, and his eyes, deep amber, were unnervingly perceptive. At first glance, Shadow looked like any other elite canine: alert posture, clipped nails, precision-trained response. But Ethan had always said there was something else, something harder to explain. Shadow didn't just find people, he felt them. The bond between man and dog had been immediate, like 2 parts of a broken watch clicking back into place. Where Ethan lacked words, Shadow filled silence with presence. Together, they had pulled 3 people from the wreckage of a tornado in Arkansas and found a missing hiker half buried under snow in Colorado. Shadow didn't just obey, he anticipated. And tonight, as water lapped at Ethan's calves and thunder growled low, the dog's senses were sharper than ever. Their task was simple: sweep the remaining homes on the edge of Willow Creek Drive. The warning had just come in. Secondary levee breach likely within the hour. The department's mandate was clear: evacuate or pull out. Ethan had 25 minutes. He checked the laminated grid map tucked into the waterproof sleeve on his chest. All homes marked with a blue X were cleared. Most were already tagged. Except, as he reached the bend in the road, Shadow stopped. His body stiffened. Ears up, nose twitching. Ethan turned toward the house beside them. 1428 Willow Creek Drive. It was an old single-story house, worn wood siding, porch sagging under years of neglect. A rusted wind chime hung still beneath the overhang. No car in the driveway. Lights off. From a distance it looked no different from the other flood-drenched homes. But on the door, no mark. Ethan frowned. "That's odd," he murmured, pulling the map back out. The house should have been checked. The previous sweep team, Charlie Unit, had passed through here yesterday morning. But 1428 was blank. No X, no date, just nothing. "Shadow," Ethan whispered. The dog responded before being commanded. His body went rigid, then began to pull on the leash, low growl in his throat. And then a bark, sharp, focused. Then another and another. Ethan's blood chilled. Shadow didn't bark unless there was something wrong. "Easy, boy," Ethan said, but his own heart was thumping now. Rain pounded harder against his back as he unlatched the gate and splashed through the front yard. The water came up past his shins. Something about this house felt off. He radioed in quickly. "Dispatch, this is Officer Moore, checking one unmarked property, house number 1428. Will update shortly." The voice crackled back a curt, "Copy that. 20 minutes more." He clipped the radio to his vest and stepped up onto the porch. Shadow was right at his side, fur dripping, body coiled like a spring. The door was unlocked. Inside, the air smelled of mildew and rot. Water had invaded every corner. Swollen wood, scattered toys, sagging wallpaper. A calendar still hung beside the kitchen, opened to a month long gone. But Ethan didn't notice the details. Not yet. Because Shadow was already moving forward, nose low, heading deeper into the dark house like a whisper cutting through fog. At that moment, Ethan felt it, that old tension in his chest, the feeling that something fragile was about to be uncovered. He didn't know what waited inside this crumbling home, but the dog beside him had never led him wrong. And as thunder rolled again and wind moaned through the broken seams of the house, Ethan tightened his grip on the flashlight, called softly, "Is anyone here?" and followed Shadow into the unknown. The door groaned on its hinges as Ethan pushed it inward, rain curling in like fingers across the warped wood floor. Inside, the air was thick with mold and time. The smell of wet drywall, decaying food, and something older, like dust that had soaked in sorrow, clung to every surface. The water, now ankle-deep, swirled with floating papers and bits of insulation torn from the ceiling. Shadow stepped in first, careful and deliberate, his black and tan coat slick from the downpour, his paws silent on the soaked floorboards. "Search," Ethan whispered. The word wasn't necessary. Shadow was already moving, nose low, ears angled like radar. He weaved through the debris with the practiced precision of a seasoned search dog. But tonight, there was something more in his stride. Urgency. Ethan followed, flashlight beam cutting through the shadows. The house looked untouched for months, maybe longer. A cracked family portrait hung askew on the wall. 2 parents and a young boy. The colors were faded, faces too warped by water damage to make out clearly, but Ethan's eyes lingered a second longer on the child's silhouette. He felt the tug, deep, aching, and familiar, and forced his gaze forward. Shadow growled softly, stopped beside the kitchen, then turned sharply toward the sink. The kitchen was worse. Cabinet doors hung crooked, dishes floated in brown water, and a refrigerator door gaped open like a mouth mid-scream. A broken mug lay half-submerged near the doorway, printed with a cartoon bear and the words, "Number 1, Dad." Shadow stepped forward and let out a low whine, pawing gently at the cabinet beneath the sink. Ethan moved in, heart pounding. Slowly, he crouched and gripped the handle. The cabinet door creaked open. Inside, curled into a shivering ball, was a small boy, no more than 6, wearing a soaked red sweater clinging to his thin frame. His knees were tucked to his chest, and in his arms he clutched a soaked stuffed bear with one ear missing and threads unraveling at the seams. Mud streaked his cheeks. His hair, light brown and tangled, stuck to his forehead. He didn't scream, didn't flinch. He just stared up, wide-eyed, pupils dilated in a mix of fear and confusion. Ethan froze, breath catching in his throat. The boy's lips were slightly blue. "Hey, buddy," he said gently, lowering his voice as if trying not to wake a ghost. "You're safe now." The boy didn't respond, but his eyes flicked to Shadow, who had sat down silently beside Ethan, and then back again. Still silent, still trembling, still clutching the bear like it was the only thread left tying him to the world. Ethan slipped off his heavy outer coat, still dry on the inside, and wrapped it carefully around the boy's shoulders. The child let out the softest sound, a barely there exhale, and leaned ever so slightly into the warmth. Ethan lifted him gently, and felt just how weightless he was. He was ice cold, but pliant, like a paper doll folded too many times. Shadow moved closer, gently sniffing the boy's hand, then nuzzled against his cheek. The boy blinked but didn't recoil. Ethan pressed the radio mic on his shoulder. "Dispatch, this is Moore. I've got a live miner found at 1428 Willow Creek, approximately 6 years old, male, unresponsive but conscious. I'm requesting medical evac ASAP." The voice on the other end crackled. "Copy that, Moore. ETA 10 minutes. Secure and proceed to evac point Alpha." Ethan whispered, "We're getting out of here, okay? You did good. Just hang on." But the boy said nothing. Meanwhile, at the Emergency Operations Center on higher ground, Captain Clara Lewis was reviewing real-time reports and mapping updates on a large screen lit by generator-powered monitors. Clara, 47, was a tall, commanding black woman with steel-gray hair cropped close to her head and a face carved from both compassion and discipline. Her posture was always perfect, and her words rarely wasted. Her reputation was that of someone unshakable, both loved and feared within the department. But those who had worked with her long enough knew there was pain beneath the polish. 15 years ago, Clara had lost her partner in a failed hostage rescue. She had blamed herself ever since. Since then, she'd held her officers to near impossible standards, not out of cruelty, but as armor. Mistakes, she believed, killed, and mistakes were never allowed to repeat. A junior tech named Luis tapped her shoulder. He was short, mid-20s, and always wore hoodies 2 sizes too big. "Captain, take a look at this," he said, pointing to the current digital map projection. Clara raised an eyebrow. "What am I seeing?" Luis zoomed in on Sector C3, Willow Creek Drive. "So, all the cleared properties are marked blue. But 1428, where Moore just found that kid, it's marked as cleared yesterday." "That's not possible," Clara muttered, pulling out the printed sweep log from earlier that morning. "Let me see the field copy." She flipped pages, scanning dates and timestamps. There it was. Sector C3, House 1428. Blank. No mark, no check. Just an empty line. Clara narrowed her eyes. Someone altered the digital log. Luis blinked. "You think it was a mistake?" Clara's tone sharpened. "I don't believe in convenient mistakes when a child nearly dies. Find out who uploaded the digital version. And check timestamp metadata. I want to know when it was changed, and by who." Back in the flood zone, Ethan stepped back onto the porch with the boy wrapped against his chest. The wind slapped hard, cold and relentless. The child trembled slightly but didn't resist. Ethan descended the porch steps, Shadow right beside him, water rising now almost to knee height. The flashlight beam caught the twisted fence post, the torn screen door across the street flapping like a distress flag. "Just hold on," Ethan murmured. "We're almost there." The boy shifted his grip, clutching tighter to the worn bear. As the rain fell around them in silence, Ethan didn't know the boy's name. But he knew this. Something was deeply wrong. This house should have never been marked safe, and someone had lied. That was the kind of thing you didn't let go, not when lives hung in the balance, not when ghosts whispered from kitchen cabinets, and definitely not when a boy barely breathing was found beneath a sink. The rain had finally slowed by the time Ethan reached the evacuation point. A temporary medical tent stood beneath the pale lights of a generator-powered pole, casting long shadows over the muddy parking lot of a shuttered strip mall. The tent walls flapped weakly in the wind, and figures in reflective jackets moved like ghosts behind the plastic sheeting. Paramedics swarmed in silence, efficient but solemn. Flood zones didn't leave room for noise. Ethan stepped into the tent's vestibule, his boots squelching with each step. Shadow remained outside, curled near the entrance, dripping and alert. The boy was still in Ethan's arms, swaddled tightly in the oversized jacket. His body hadn't shivered in the last few minutes, but his silence spoke volumes. Paramedic Jenna Ruiz, a compact Latina woman with tired eyes and a calm, no-nonsense demeanor, met him at the flap. Jenna was in her late 30s, with dark hair tucked beneath a waterproof hood and calloused hands that moved with quiet confidence. She'd worked through wildfires and hurricanes, and had long since stopped flinching at the worst of human vulnerability. "Bring him in," she said softly, leading Ethan to a cot surrounded by IV poles and blankets. Noah didn't resist as she examined him, his limbs, his vitals, his breathing, but he also didn't respond, not even when Jenna asked his name. "I found him under the sink," Ethan said, standing beside the cot, still dripping. He was curled up tight with this. He handed Jenna the bear. It was soaked, limp, and nearly falling apart at the seams. "He hasn't said anything?" she asked. Ethan hesitated. "No, but—" "He did something. When I held him, he tapped my arm. 3 times. Jenna looked at him, puzzled. "Like a signal?" "I don't know, but he did it again outside the house. 3 knocks. Then again when we reached the truck. It's like it means something." Jenna nodded slowly, wrapped the child in a thermal blanket, and placed the bear beside him. "We'll warm him up. Give him time. Trauma like this, sometimes it locks the voice away." Ethan crouched beside the cot. Noah's wide eyes stared at the ceiling, unmoving. Then slowly, so slowly, his small hand reached toward Ethan's forearm. He tapped once, then again, then a 3rd time. Tap, tap, tap. Ethan's heart thudded. "I hear you, buddy," he whispered. "I'm not going anywhere." Back at the command center, Captain Clara Lewis paced in front of the operations board. The storm had passed, but the fallout was just beginning. Her sharp gray eyes scanned the house logs, timestamps, clearance routes. A dozen staffers moved around her, but none disturbed her focus. Her mind, even after hours of crisis response, was a machine. Sharp, fast, unforgiving. She turned to her junior tech, Luis, who was hunched over a laptop with a grim expression. "Talk to me." Luis pointed to a red, highlighted row on the spreadsheet. "Digital log shows that 1428 Willow Creek was cleared at 0647 yesterday morning. Signatures attached. Daniel Cross." Clara's mouth tightened. Daniel Cross. The name wasn't unfamiliar. Retired logistics officer turned municipal contractor. Tall, always in dark suits with a voice like smoke and a handshake too firm. He had a reputation. Quietly persuasive, suspiciously efficient. And once, 5 years ago, he had been accused of manipulating vendor lists during flood relief efforts in Westfield County. But the investigation found no wrongdoing. The file was buried, the accuser discredited. "Pull his personnel file," Clara said, "and I want original paper records, no digital copies." Luis nodded, already typing. Moments later, Ethan entered the operations tent, water still dripping from his cuffs. Clara turned. Her voice was calm, but it carried weight. "Officer Moore? The boy?" "He's alive. Weak. No injuries I could see, but he hasn't spoken. Just taps. 3 times, every time I get near." Clara's brow creased. "Like Morse code?" "Maybe, but it felt more like a pattern, like something his mother told him." She paused. "Do we have a name?" Ethan nodded. "I found a photo in the house. Water damaged, but legible. The name Noah Bennett was written on the back. I think it's him." Clara exhaled. "Write a full report. Include every detail, and attach the scanned photo. I'm opening a side investigation." Ethan gave a short nod, then paused. "Captain, Cross's name is on the clearance?" Clara's eyes flicked to the report in her hand. It is. He was the one who signed off on that house? He was. Ethan clenched his jaw. He shouldn't be anywhere near these files. You know something? Clara asked. Ethan didn't answer right away. Instead, he stepped closer, lowering his voice. Back in Westfield, I was there. My team had just pulled a family from a trailer park, supposed to be marked as dangerous. Cross had marked it safe in the system, said he'd double-checked personally. But when we got there, it was almost underwater. 2 kids barely made it out alive. Clara's eyes narrowed. Why didn't you report him? I did, Ethan said quietly. They buried it. She nodded once. Not this time. Later that night, while writing his report in the corner of the break room, Ethan paused. The image of Noah's tiny hand tapping 3 times haunted him. It wasn't random. It had meaning. He thought of his own son, Jamie, who used to knock on the kitchen table 3 times when asking for juice. Tap, tap, tap. A rhythm. A message. He opened the scanned photo of Noah's family, enhanced the details. In the background was a hand-painted sign. Stay put if you're lost. Mommy will come back. The words looked like they had been hung in the kitchen. Noah's 3 knocks weren't Morse. They were memory, and the last words of a mother trying to keep her son alive. The morning after the storm broke over, Silver Pines felt eerily quiet, the kind of stillness that settles in only after something violent has passed. Water still lingered in the gutters and lowland ditches, and silt clung to every surface like a memory refusing to wash away. Ethan sat alone at a folding table inside the operations center, lit by pale yellow bulbs strung along the ceiling. Around him, volunteers sorted supply crates while exhausted officers drifted in and out with clipboards and heavy eyes. But Ethan wasn't moving. In front of him were 2 maps. One digital, displayed on a tablet, and one printed and laminated with handwritten notations. On both, Willow Creek Drive appeared clearly. On the printed version, it was outlined in yellow. High risk, low access. But on the digital map, it had somehow been changed to green. Cleared, stable, safe. It had happened exactly 24 hours before the storm hit. He traced the shift back through timestamps embedded in the metadata. The change came from a municipal office, Department of Emergency Logistics. The user ID attached? DCross74. Ethan stared at the name like it might blink first. Daniel Cross. Ethan leaned back, rubbing the bridge of his nose. He hadn't slept. He couldn't. There was too much noise in his head, 3 soft knocks repeating like a metronome behind his eyes. He opened another document, this one pulled from the town's procurement logs. Riverline Logistics had secured 3 emergency supply contracts in the past month. Each was pushed through with expedited approval under flood emergency clauses, and all were signed off by the same trio of names, the town's mayor, the city planner, and Daniel Cross, CEO of Riverline. He dug deeper. Riverline had never operated in Missouri before this month. Their website had been created 6 weeks ago. No history, no prior contracts, just a glossy front page and a mission statement full of buzzwords like resilience, community, and streamlined action. Ethan scrolled further and stopped. Riverline's mailing address was a P.O. box registered to an old logistics warehouse once used by FEMA during Hurricane Alice. That warehouse had burned down 2 years ago. His jaw tightened. He knew what this was. A ghost company. A front. Cross hadn't just manipulated data, he'd orchestrated an entire shell operation under the cover of flood response. Shadow, Ethan muttered under his breath. But when he turned, the German Shepherd wasn't by his side. He was under the table, curled up tightly, head resting between his paws. Shadow, now 5, looked more tired than Ethan had ever seen him. His fur was still damp from yesterday, and his breath came slower than usual. He wasn't limping, he wasn't injured, but his body sagged with the weight of overwork. Ethan reached down, fingers brushing behind the dog's ear. "You okay, partner?" No response, Just a faint flick of Shadow's ear. That was enough. Ethan stood and gently coaxed Shadow to his feet. The dog followed, obedient but sluggish. Ethan guided him out of the center and into the side parking lot where his cruiser sat half covered in dust and debris. He opened the rear door. Shadow climbed in without protest. They drove to the town's temporary veterinary clinic, set up beside the middle school gymnasium. Inside, rows of kennels and folding cots lined the space. The air smelled of antiseptic and wet fur, mixed with soft whimpers and the hum of fans drying the space. Dr. Grace Holloway stood near the back, reviewing intake charts beneath a battery-powered lamp. She was in her early 30s, with freckles scattered across pale skin and chestnut curls tied back loosely with a pencil. Tall and slim, she had a relaxed posture that made anxious pets and tense owners instinctively relax around her. She wore canvas pants tucked into muddy boots and a gray shirt that read, "Animals speak, we listen." Grace had grown up in Silver Pines and returned after vet school, trading corporate offers for small-town healing. Her older brother had died in combat when she was 16, and since then she'd carried an unspoken mission, to be the kind of calm she wished someone had been for her. She looked up as Ethan approached. "You look like you haven't slept since the flood warnings went out." "I haven't," Ethan replied. "Neither has he." Grace crouched as Ethan unclipped Shadow's harness. The dog stepped forward and sat patiently, eyes half-lidded but still tracking her every move. "Any injuries?" "No, but he's not himself." She ran practiced hands along Shadow's ribs, legs, spine, listened to his heartbeat, checked his gums, his ears, his gait. Shadow didn't flinch once. After 10 minutes, she stood and offered a faint smile. "He's just exhausted. Muscles tight, but no inflammation. Heart rate a little low, but not dangerously. He's been pushing hard. Probably picking up on all the emotional strain around you, too." Ethan blinked. "You think he feels that?" Grace nodded. "Search and rescue canines aren't just trained for terrain. They read us. They mirror. The fear, the adrenaline, the grief, it all channels through the bond. He's running on instinct and loyalty. That kind of dog, he'll keep going until he drops if he thinks you need him." Ethan crouched beside Shadow, resting his hand over the dog's broad shoulders. "I do need him." "Then let him rest so he can keep showing up." She handed Ethan a sealed envelope. "Vitamin boosters. Keep him dry. Let him sleep somewhere quiet." "Thanks, Grace." She smiled again, softer this time. "Tell him I said he's a hero." Outside, the skies had cleared enough to let sunlight break through, thin and watery but golden against the silver mud. Ethan opened the back door of his cruiser again and let Shadow climb in, curling instantly into the corner seat like a soldier folding into a bunker. Back at headquarters, Ethan uploaded all his findings to a secure flash drive. Then, almost as an afterthought, he scrawled one line in his notebook under the name Daniel Cross. He didn't forget Willow Creek. He erased it. The evacuation center had been moved into the Silver Pines Community Hall, a sturdy brick building on a low ridge that had somehow escaped the flooding. Inside, cots lined the basketball court, partitioned by makeshift curtains of plastic tarps and donated quilts. The air was thick with the scent of instant coffee, antiseptic, and damp clothing. Ethan sat beside one of the smaller cots near the edge of the hall, watching Noah sleep. The boy had been sleeping more soundly since yesterday, though he still clung to the tattered stuffed bear like it was stitched to his chest. Ethan leaned back in the folding chair, his legs outstretched, a half-eaten protein bar in his hand. Shadow lay curled near Noah's cot, his eyes half-lidded but always watchful. The dog hadn't moved much, but there was warmth in his posture now, less tension, more presence. It was early morning, and the thin light coming through the tall gymnasium windows caught on the metal rails of the cots and the curls of steam rising from paper cups. The quiet was rare. Precious. Ethan savored it. Then he heard it, a soft intake of breath, followed by a whisper, barely audible, like the voice of the wind brushing across a field. "Don't be scared." Ethan sat up, pulse quickening. He turned to Noah, whose eyes were open now, gazing not at Ethan but at Shadow. The boy reached out, fingertips brushing the dog's ear. "Mom said that," Noah whispered. "I heard her voice. In the wind. Like him." His small hand pointed to Shadow. "Like his bark." Ethan swallowed hard. "You heard her during the storm?" Noah nodded slowly. "She said to stay still, that help would come, and when I heard the barking I knew she sent him." Shadow lifted his head then, as if acknowledging the moment. He didn't move otherwise, but the soft thump of his tail against the gym floor made Noah smile for the first time. It was small, almost invisible, but it was there. Ethan placed a hand gently on the edge of Noah's cot. "You're safe now. We found you, and we're not leaving." Noah looked up at him, eyes brighter than before. "Are you staying with me?" Ethan nodded. "As long as you want." At that moment, the curtain behind Ethan parted, and a familiar voice called out, dry and edged with curiosity. "Did I just walk in on an emotional breakthrough?" Ethan turned and almost smiled. April Sanders stood there with a weathered satchel slung over her shoulder and a pen stuck through her curly bun. She was in her early 40s, tall and wiry, with freckled olive-toned skin and a wardrobe that looked like it hadn't changed since college. Cargo pants, combat boots, and a navy blue rain jacket with half the buttons missing. Her face was sharp, her dark brown eyes always half-lidded with suspicion, and her voice carried the tone of someone who had been ignored one too many times in male-dominated newsrooms. April was the kind of reporter who refused to call herself a journalist, insisting she chased stories, not careers. She and Ethan had worked together once, 5 years ago during the Parker abduction case. She'd gotten the truth out when no one else had dared. She also nearly got herself arrested for hacking into a county database, but in the end, her work saved a life, and Ethan respected that more than any badge. "April," he said, "I was wondering how long it'd take you." She stepped closer, eyes flicking toward Noah, then down to Shadow. "Is that the kid?" "His name's Noah," Ethan replied. "He just started talking again." April's expression softened for a flicker of a second. "That's good. You know, there's a reason I'm here. Word's going around that someone changed zoning status on entire neighborhoods. Willow Creek, West Point, East Harbor, all marked safe 48 hours before the levees cracked." Ethan leaned back. "You found that out already?" April smirked. "You forget who you're talking to." She pulled a tablet from her bag and handed it to Ethan. "Look at this. Riverline Logistics. No operating history. No verifiable staff outside of one name, Daniel Cross. Guess what popped up last night on a whistleblower forum I monitor?" She tapped the screen. A memo appeared. "Expedited emergency contract awarded to Riverline Logistics. Pre-approval waived. Signed, Mayor Tricia Hollowell. Planner Douglas Vexler. CEO Daniel Cross." Ethan's eyes narrowed. "You think they cut corners on purpose?" April gave a snort. "I think they erased entire communities to streamline supply routes. Low-income zones, non-voting blocks, fringe properties. The kind of places that won't make headlines if they vanish." Ethan stared at the screen, then at Noah. "They didn't vanish. They just waited." April's gaze followed his, "and almost didn't survive." Ethan stood and handed her back the tablet. "Help me build the case." "I already started," she said, "but I want it airtight. Witnesses, records, testimonies. You've got the access. I've got the reach. We can bring this down." A soft cough drew both their attention. Noah sat up, eyes clearer now, still focused on Shadow. "He barked before the door opened," the boy said softly, "like he knew I was in there." April crouched down beside the cot. "He's a smart dog." Noah looked from her to Ethan. "Are you guys going to tell people what they did, so no one else has to hide?" Ethan's voice was quiet. "That's the plan." Noah didn't say anything for a moment. Then he reached for Ethan's wrist and tapped. Once, twice, 3 times. Ethan smiled. "We hear you, Noah." And this time, Noah smiled back. The sun had returned to Silver Pines, but it did little to warm the damage left behind. Streets were still scattered with debris, and windows remained boarded as if shielding themselves from the truth. Inside the modest editorial office of the Silver Pines Daily, Ethan sat beside April Sanders as her fingers flew over the laptop keys. The walls around them were lined with dusty file cabinets, old headlines framed with pride, and corkboards filled with notes and pins like a detective's crime web. A small, oscillating fan hummed from the corner, cutting the heat. April's usual trench coat was slung over the back of her chair. She wore a faded black tee under a plaid flannel, sleeves rolled up to her elbows. A deep scar ran diagonally across the back of her right hand, a remnant from a protest-turned-riot in Baton Rouge, something she never talked about, but it had changed how she looked at power and silence. She had learned long ago that silence could be engineered. Now she was about to prove it. "Okay," she said, voice sharp. "I got into the server logs. Someone uploaded a compressed file just hours before the zoning changes went public. It was flagged as a meeting minutes document. Encrypted, of course, but not very well." She clicked open an audio file, the scratchy sound of chairs moving, then a man's voice, smooth, professional, and unmistakable. "Daniel Cross. We cut the red zones to minimal. We'll redirect supply to corridors with higher utility revenue. Willow Creek, East Harbor, they're not essential. We'll list them as cleared, safe zones. No one's going to miss them." Another voice replied, lower and clipped, male. April rewound and played again. Douglas Vexler, City Planning Officer. A thin man in his mid-50s, balding with tired eyes and a mild limp, Vexler had always been described as pliable, a bureaucrat's bureaucrat. "But what about the households flagged in yellow?" Vexler asked. "They don't vote," Cross replied flatly. "They don't donate. They don't headline. You want to shave off 20% of your emergency footprint. This is how." April hit pause. The silence that followed was heavier than any storm. Ethan leaned back in his chair, staring at the floor. They erased people with a spreadsheet. April's voice was tight. Not erased. Sacrificed. So they could keep their profit margin clean. Ethan stood and paced the room, fists clenched. And no one said a word. "No one who could fight back," April said, turning the volume down. "But we're not done. There's more." She tapped through folders and opened a scanned document. "This is the request Isabel Bennett sent 3 days before the storm." Ethan stepped closer. The form was standard. Request for evacuation assistance. Isabel had handwritten her details. Mother of 1, no vehicle, no nearby family. She listed her address on Willow Creek, stated her son had asthma, and added in blue ink at the bottom, "Please send someone. We have nowhere else to go." The request had been stamped "Received," but there was no second stamp, no action, no signature. April shook her head. It just sat there, in an inbox. The storm came, and no one ever showed up. Ethan's voice dropped. She stayed for him. April looked over. "What?" "She told him to wait," Ethan said quietly, "to hide, because she was going to get help, or die trying." April swallowed hard and closed the laptop. The silence between them wasn't just grief, it was fury. Outside, the late afternoon had dulled into soft gold. The street below bustled again. Residents hammering new panels, volunteers passing bottled water, city workers loading sandbags into trucks. Life was creeping back. But Ethan didn't move from the window. His reflection blurred against the glass, Shadow's silhouette lying behind him like a dark sentry. April stepped beside him. "We released the audio, the form, the logs, all of it." Ethan nodded. "And we include Noah's story." She hesitated. "Are you sure? He's been through enough." "He wants people to know," Ethan said, "and she deserves to be heard." April exhaled, grabbed her phone, and began uploading files to her secure server. "Then we hit publish at midnight." As the last upload bar completed, a gust of wind outside rattled the windows. Ethan turned back to Shadow and knelt beside him. The dog opened one eye, gave a single thump of his tail. She stayed because she thought someone would come. Ethan whispered. She believed in people like me. He rested his hand on Shadow's chest, feeling the slow, steady rhythm. Then he looked toward April. Let's make sure this time someone listens. At midnight, April hit publish. The article exploded across local and national feeds under the headline, Sacrificed by the Flood, the Hidden Zoning Scandal of Silver Pines. Accompanied by audio clips, scans of falsified documents, and the quiet testimony of a 6-year-old boy named Noah Bennett, the story spread like wildfire. Within hours, it was picked up by regional news affiliates, then the National Wire. By dawn, protesters were gathering in front of Silver Pines City Hall, soaked not by rain, but by their own rising fury. They carried hand-painted signs, "We are not forgotten," "Justice for Noah," "People over profit." The steps of City Hall, usually deserted by sunrise, filled with teachers, nurses, off-duty officers, and even elderly residents wrapped in quilts and outrage. From the second-story window, Ethan watched the crowd with a mixture of awe and fatigue. He had barely slept since the story went live. His uniform, wrinkled and splattered with dried mud, hung loose on his frame. His beard had begun to shadow his jawline, and his eyes bore the red rims of a man holding everything together by willpower alone. Downstairs, officers in plain clothes tried to maintain calm, but they did not interfere. The truth had landed, and even they couldn't deny its weight. Behind Ethan, Noah stood barefoot in the hallway, holding Shadow's leash in one hand and his stuffed bear in the other. The boy was dressed in a clean blue hoodie with sleeves too long, cuffs frayed at the ends from nervous picking. His face had filled out slightly since the flood, still pale, but no longer ghostly. His cheeks now carried the faintest blush of life returning. Shadow, alert as always, walked calmly beside him, his black and tan fur freshly brushed by one of the center's volunteers. He had regained his strength, though he remained quiet, as if knowing his role had shifted from rescuer to guardian. Ethan turned and smiled. "Hey, you two ready?" Noah nodded and reached for Ethan's hand. They walked outside together, down the steps of the temporary housing center. The crowd parted slightly as they appeared, quieting at first, then beginning to clap, soft, respectful, as if greeting a symbol rather than a celebrity. Among the crowd, a figure in a dark blue FBI windbreaker stood with arms crossed. Agent Marlene Trask, late 40s, sharp features and short silver hair, had arrived 2 hours ago from the regional bureau. She was known in federal circles for her ability to dismantle corruption with surgical precision. Her tall, athletic frame moved like she was always ready to sprint, though her demeanor was cool and calculating. Trask approached Ethan with a file in hand. "Daniel Cross has been taken into custody. He was intercepted at his home in Greenville trying to destroy files. We found encrypted drives, but thanks to your tip and Sanders' archive, we don't need them." "What about the others?" Ethan asked. Trask's expression didn't change. "Mayor Hollowell resigned an hour ago. Vexler and 3 procurement officers are under federal review. We're coordinating with DOJ now." Ethan nodded once. "And me?" She handed him an envelope. "Effective immediately, you're being reassigned to Western Recovery Coordination, Civilian Oversight Division." He opened it. Inside was a formal letter, stamped and signed, offering relocation, an official commendation, and a quiet path forward. Ethan looked up, jaw clenched. "They want me to walk away." Trask didn't argue. "They want you out of the spotlight. It's what bureaucracies do." Ethan folded the letter, placed it in his pocket, and said, "I'm not going anywhere." Trask smiled for the first time. "Didn't think you would." Later that afternoon, Ethan sat on a bench beneath a newly planted oak tree outside the shelter's courtyard. Noah was drawing with chalk on the sidewalk. Clouds, dogs, trees, and a crooked little house labeled Home. Shadow lay stretched beside him, eyes closed but ears alert. April arrived in a loose gray blazer, her bag over one shoulder and her phone buzzing every few seconds. She sat beside Ethan with a sigh, running a hand through her curls. 3 media outlets offered to license the story. I told them they could share it for free, but only if they also published the names of every victim family that came forward. "Sounds like you're becoming an optimist," Ethan said. April snorted. "No, just really tired of liars." They sat in silence for a moment, watching as Noah added yellow sunbeams to his drawing. "You're good with him," April said. "I wasn't at first." "You are now." Ethan glanced toward the boy, who was now drawing shadow next to the house, a large black and tan shape with careful strokes. "He called me Dad this morning," Ethan said quietly. "Just once, then went back to coloring." April didn't speak for a long beat. Then she smiled. "You gonna correct him?" "No," Ethan said. "Not once." That night, a small ceremony was held in the shelter's common room. A local judge, Marcia Everly, an African-American woman in her late 60s with a gentle voice and stern gaze, had come to finalize the adoption. She wore a knit cardigan and reading glasses and held Noah's file gently, like a sacred text. She looked at Ethan, then at Noah, who clutched Shadow's harness and stood straight. "Do you promise to care for this child as your own, to protect him, to love him, to give him a home?" Ethan knelt, looking Noah in the eyes. "I already do." Noah smiled, then reached for Ethan's hand. "Hi, Dad." The room erupted in soft applause. Shadow barked once, just loud enough to mark the moment. 1 year later, the wind carried no scent of rain, only sun-warmed earth and the faint tang of summer wildflowers. On the south edge of Silver Pines, where the floodwaters had once risen past rooftops, a new building stood among the restored grass. A low structure made of timber and steel, with solar panels glinting across its roof and large windows that looked out across the valley. The sign outside read, "Willow Resilience Center." Ethan Moore stood at the edge of the main field, dressed in a navy shirt embroidered with the center's Pine Branch logo. His build was a little broader now, his jawline stronger, and his eyes had softened in the way men's eyes do when they've been called Dad every day for a year. In one hand, he held a whistle. In the other, a clipboard with the names of 15 kids currently learning how to build tarp shelters from recycled plastic and rope. Laughter rang out behind him. A group of children ran in a loose circle around the training obstacle course, climbing over low walls and crawling under wooden beams. At the center of their orbit, guiding and occasionally nudging, was Shadow, now 5 years old, thick-furred, muscular, and more focused than ever. His black and tan coat gleamed in the sun, and though his scarred leg bore a faint stiffness, he moved with purpose, head high, eyes sharp. Shadow had become more than a canine. He was a mascot, a mentor, a quiet protector. Every kid at the center knew that if Shadow followed you, you were doing something right. And if he sat beside you without a command, you probably needed someone to sit with you. From the side path, a small group of parents watched, sipping lemonade under a canvas shade. Among them sat Ruth Ellison, the town librarian. In her late 60s, Ruth was petite, with short gray curls and a pair of oversized glasses that never quite stayed on her nose. Known for her encyclopedic memory and a fierce belief that every story, no matter how small, deserved a shelf, Ruth had survived the flood and helped rebuild the library with her own 2 hands. Today, she carried a framed painting under her arm. When the children took a break for water, Ethan called them together into a shaded corner where picnic benches had been set up for art and storytelling. Noah, now 7, led the group with confident steps. He was taller now, his once tangled hair neatly combed to the side, his voice stronger, and his eyes, still wide and thoughtful, had shed the fog of fear. Noah wore a green cotton t-shirt with the words Shadow's Team across the back in hand-painted letters. He held a rolled canvas in his hands, edges still damp from brushwork. "All right, everyone," Ethan said, waving a hand. "Before we finish, Noah's got something he wants to share." The children sat cross-legged. Shadow trotted over and lay beside Noah, his head resting against the boy's ankle. Noah unrolled the canvas carefully and held it up. Painted in watercolor and crayon was a familiar shape, a small wooden house surrounded by tall grass, a single tree, and the outline of a dog, Shadow, standing guard in front. The roof of the house was painted in deep green, not from realism, but from choice. Across the bottom, in the handwriting of a child who had practiced hard, were the words, "The greenhouse, where Shadow found me." The group fell silent for a moment. Then soft applause broke out, first from Ethan, then from the other children, and finally from Ruth, who stepped forward, misty-eyed. "I've been waiting for that," Ruth said, lifting the frame in her arms. Inside it was the same image, scanned and printed, now behind glass. "Noah, with your permission, I'd like to hang this at the library." Noah looked at Ethan, then at Shadow, and nodded. "Only if it helps other kids not be scared." "It will," Ruth said gently. "It already has." Later that afternoon, the framed painting was hung in the children's section of the Silver Pines Public Library. Above it, on a small wooden plaque, were etched the words, "For all who were once forgotten, but never again." Shadow sat beneath the display during the ceremony, silent as always. A little girl tugged at her father's sleeve and asked, "Is that the real dog from the painting?" Ethan, standing nearby, knelt and answered, "He's the reason it exists." Outside the library, the town square bustled with life. Summer markets had returned. Murals were being painted on buildings once scarred by floodlines, and in a corner of the square stood a bronze sculpture of Shadow, ears perked, tail down, gaze forward, commissioned by anonymous donors and unveiled just weeks earlier. Tourists took photos. Children climbed the base. But locals, especially those who had stayed behind when the storm came, knew what it meant. Shadow wasn't just a dog. He was a symbol, hope with 4 paws. That evening, back at the Willow Resilience Center, Ethan and Noah sat on the porch swing outside their small on-site home. The sun was setting, casting everything in gold. Fireflies were beginning to blink between the grass. Noah leaned into Ethan's side. "Do you think Mom would like the greenhouse?" Ethan looked down, brushing a hand through the boy's hair. "I think she'd be proud you turned it into something that saves other kids." Noah was quiet a moment. "I still hear her sometimes. Not in words, just like when the wind moves the trees." Ethan nodded. "That's how you know she's with you." From below the swing, Shadow lifted his head and gave a soft huff, like he agreed. In the final light of day, the 3 of them sat there, man, boy, and dog, wrapped in the kind of silence that heals, not haunts. Sometimes God sends angels in uniforms and fur, silent guardians who walk through storms so others can be found. This story isn't just about rescue. It's about grace that finds us when we feel forgotten, about second chances born in the floodwaters of sorrow. And maybe, just maybe, it's about a quiet whisper from above that reminds us, no matter how lost we feel, we are never truly alone. In the everyday noise of life, small miracles still happen. When a child is comforted, when a dog senses fear and stays, when a stranger becomes family. That is the power of compassion. That is the hand of God. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs hope. Leave a comment below, tell us your story, or simply type Amen if you believe that no act of love is ever wasted. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and join us for more stories that prove kindness still matters. May God bless you, and may He watch over all those still waiting to be found.